Welcome to Scaling the Wall, a podcast where we uncover the real stories behind how people got into cybersecurity in the first place. And what we're learning is, most didn't follow a straight path. And that wall that seems so high from the outside isn't as tall as it really looks. So listen in and see where your story might fit. Let's get to it.
We started out as a MSP specifically focusing on companies that run off Apple environments.
Oh, nice, yeah.
With large Mac estates. So, yeah, the interesting thing about us is that started out as very much the creative studios. And because those are the type of people back in the day that were using Macs, it was kind of the weird thing that they used to use and no one else understood. So people like us came along to have like specialist care almost for those people. So the big change for us, and the reason why we are in the security field now, is that the types of people that adopt Macs predominantly are tech companies. And tech companies have regulatory requirements. They also have a high need for sort of more bespoke security systems.
Yeah.
So we kind of really built a security capability initially in security architecture, and now especially in GRC and helping people through things like ISO 27001. So it's evolved from that to us sort of being this really specialist sort of tech company that are sort of serving tech-driven companies.
That's wild. You bring up the creative, and even in the brief back and forth you and I had when we when Jesse first again, shout out to Jesse Miller, but when he first made that introduction for us, you had mentioned you had been in theater, fictional writing. Like you've had an incredibly non-linear path, right? From at least when it comes to cybersecurity. So from like theater, fiction, now you're in cyber. So can you kind of just walk us through your journey, start to finish? I mean, that's really what I love to do on this show, is hear your story.
Sure. So, the interesting thing about why, I've probably had an unusual journey and why, in our company, we do have a lot of people with kind of these quirky stories, is because of the whole Mac focus. So the types of people that ended up, really looking after people that are running on Macs were people who were from a creative industry. So they've, I first used a Mac when I was during one of my plays. I did all the video design. I did kind of projection design on it. I did the sound design on my little iBook G4. So when it came time for me to actually earn some sort of proper money, I was like, well, I'm really good at using my Mac, so I can kind of get into tech that way. So that's why we've got these unusual stories. But let me tell you my story.
Yeah, please.
I'll go back to, I think, the beginning of my professional journey. So I sort of, after leaving school, I really wanted to be an actor. And so the first thing I did for probably like 2 to 3 years was I toured doing children's theatre. So I went all around the UK. I think I went to every big town in the UK and every big town in Ireland doing setting up our little children's theatre sets and entertaining primary school children, which is, I don't know what your US equivalent, the little ones. When I was doing that touring, I wrote my first play. Because there's a lot of time to kill when you're there with just the same 3 people for like months on end. So I wrote a play, and then when I finished the tour, I directed, produced, essentially put on this play, got a bunch of actors together and put it on. And that was when I was 19. So from that kind of age, that was when I first did my first play.
Did you you wrote the play?
Yeah, I wrote it and I directed it and I produced it.
What was it called? Can you say?
Yeah, it was really old school. It's called A Modern Love Story.
A Modern Love Story. My wife would probably love it.
Yeah. It's quite different to my later stuff. I did a lot of political theatre later, particularly US actually, because I lived in Texas for a year and I did a year of studying. But
I can tell by your accent. Yeah, very Texan.
In the story. So that's where we were. So after I did that first play, I realized that I didn't want to act anymore. I wanted to direct and I wanted to write. So I went to drama school, which is like a theatre performing arts school, and we have here in the UK. and I specialized in directing. And I was the first and still the only student to write and direct one of our final showcase productions as part of that course. So I very much wanted to do my own thing and put plays on and kind of run and lead a company. So after I graduated, I carried on running that theatre company. We did several shows around Fringe London theatre, and that was great. There came a point though with theatre is the economics are a bit difficult, and essentially, making a living out of doing kind of very experimental pieces that I was doing isn't really very easy. So I actually at that point I decided to just change what I was doing. I sold all my possessions, bought a one-way ticket to Australia, quit my job, and I traveled around Australia for a year, and I started writing books. And these books were essentially very literary, so it's very kind of niche, allegorical literary fiction. I wrote, I think, about 4 books in the space of a year, and one of those books I sent around, and I had in total 10 literary agents request to read the whole manuscript. Which, if you're not in the publishing world, that's quite a very decent number. It's
Sure.
they probably read about 1 in 2,000 that they receive. So I had a lot of interest in this book, and and at one point it got passed to one of the top agents in the country who was agent for Nelson Mandela and John Le Carre and stuff
Wow.
like that. But it wasn't quite good enough. I missed the mark a bit. It was a bit too obscure. I have a tendency to be a bit too cerebral in the writing and the plays I was doing as well. So
Classic
really,
artist.
yeah, they were really intense. I loved them. I loved
I'm
that
sure.
intensity.
Yeah.
But whether I communicated that properly to the audience, I don't know. That's the problem. But yeah, so I didn't quite get there. But and after that, I then wrote a whole another one. Probably spent 2 years writing the next one based on feedback I got, and then I decided to scrap it all and embrace what I was doing, which was working in technology. And during that time, all the time on the side, I was working in tech, supporting these Mac-based businesses as part of the company I'm in now. And what was happening during that time was I was looking after all the people that had high security requirements. So I'd kind of found myself naturally working in those environments. And for some reason, I really enjoy it. I still don't quite understand why, but I quite enjoy working and making things secure. Anyway, that I decided to really, really lean into that, and I thought, and to be honest, the other part of it is the birth of my second daughter, and sort of family life. Time to settle down and stop being a tortured artist, maybe.
I know that life all too well, man. I mean, I got married, had a daughter, and I was like, dude, the current career I'm in is not going to support a family. So it's
Yeah,
interesting that the shift happens partially because of that. Your priorities change.
yeah, definitely. I think the first one, I was sort of like, yeah, I could still ride out
Hmm.
that lifestyle and kind of focus on the creative stuff. The second one, it was like, no way, that's completely out of Um, yeah, so I decided to dive headfirst into security. I was like, I really love doing this, so I'm going to just study, study, study. So I got through some big exams, the CISP exam, and the CC Certified Cloud Security Professional exam, and AWS Solutions Architecture and things like that. What I was doing at the time was very much I was very much architecting technical solutions. So I kind of put the security spin on the architecture, and I loved doing that. And I still love. I kind of missed that bit a little bit. But yeah, that led me into it, and then it sort of, because this demand was rising in our company for security, I was in the right position to kind of really push that agenda ahead in the company. And that led me to eventually becoming Chief Information Security Officer for our company, where I developed and sort of created these new security services. And then a year earlier this year, so January, I was actually asked to take over as CEO of the company. So the shift in the services and the types of clients we were getting was very much leading us down this kind of security focus. But I think the unique thing is, coming from the background I have, and it's about sort of applying security in a way that really helps the business. It's not kind of a security for security's sake. Our mission is to help businesses understand and make informed decisions. Um, so that's led me to here and to the position where we're pushing the company ahead into that arena. When it comes to and that change for me, going from this, security architect into kind of, leading the security function, leading the company. For me, it's very much like coming home. I always used to miss the rehearsal room days. The writing, for some reason, I really thought I would miss it. I was like, how am I going to survive, as an artist if I can't get up and write in the morning? But actually, I don't miss it because I really love what I do. And the thing that I do love is that I kind of feel like I'm back in the rehearsal room, and that every day running the company is like, if you think that's difficult, try running a production with like 8 actors in a room and trying to put on a kind of show. It's the same kind of buzz you get out of it, I think.
What does the typical rehearsal room look like? Compare, like, if you were to compare those two, because I mean, I did some theater stuff in college and high school, but I never did it on a professional level, so I don't know how
Yeah.
intense that gets versus the world of being in cybersecurity, being an MSP, being on the forefront of the front lines of potential attacks on a daily basis. Who knows, right? So curious what those parallels look like in more detail.
Yeah, I think the way I kind of see it and work with it is that, it's about people,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're running a team and running a company, and it's about creating a shared vision and leading everyone towards that vision, but also incorporating all the kind of creative aspects of all your team. I mean, the best kind of, parallel I can draw, and one that's really, I think, shaped me as a kind of, leader, is that I had these experiences in theatre where I used to work with a brilliant designer, and she really got the vision of the play that I was doing. And what I would do was give her the vision and make her understand it. And she would go away and she'd come back with a much better design than I would have ever have thought about. I couldn't have pieced together that design. And then I've also worked with some designers I haven't quite clicked with. And no matter how much explaining I did, it never quite sunk in. And I ended up dictating the design. I said, I want it to look like this. I want this bit here, this bit here. The actors are going to stand here. And design just didn't work because I'm not a designer. If I try and design it proxying through someone, it's going to be terrible. So my kind of way of thinking of it is like I've got a bunch of people in the room, and I always think of it as kind of like a theatre troupe. And the way I like to approach recruitment is to think of it like we're an experimental theatre troupe. If you get people with unique skills, unique backgrounds into a room together, and you arm them with the mission, and you set the right direction and you give the right structure, what's going to come out of it is much better than if you just stood in a chair and said, you do this, you stand here, you stand here. So that's how, where the similarities are, I think, is if you approach it like a creative process and approach everything like a creative process, ultimately the net result of that is always going to be better if you're incorporating everyone's creativity into it.
Yeah, man, it's so fascinating when you get creatives in an industry like cybersecurity, because cybersecurity is, well, I come from the insurance background, and insurance carriers often ask cybersecurity questions like they're this black and white concept. And every MSP I talk to tells me that that is so far from the truth. So then to get creatives in there to say, all right, how can we brainstorm around this? How can we really make this accessible, understood? How do we do this better than everyone else? Man, it's fascinating. Um, but I want to go back just briefly to your story a little bit. You said when you were writing, you were already working in cybersecurity. Was that to kind of like pay the bills on the side kind of mindset?
That's right. Yeah. So I used to get up at 6 in the morning and do like 2 hours of writing before the normal day started, and then kind of switch headspaces into work.
How
So
did you pivot to that job? So you went from being in theater and acting and directing and producing shows to saying, all right, I'm going to go write. And you mentioned you need to be able to pay the bills. So you started working in cybersecurity. What did that pivot look like? Because that is very interesting. I know you mentioned you use Macs, you understand Macs, but what did that switch into cyber look like for you?
yeah, so there's two switches. So one switch was into sort of technology in general, and the other switch was from technology to security. So, and I think that's really important for people in the field looking to break into the field. You're inherently security, cybersecurity is a high trust role, and it's also there's less security professionals per employees in your typical organization. So it's very it's a high trust kind of role with kind of like, let's say, a help desk support or like an IT based role. The game is different. It's there's more per more per employee and stuff like that. So I was putting on productions for that first jump, and I was really good at using the Apple thing to do everything. And I got a job with Apple as a in a Genius bar. You have the Apple stores and you've got the people that help you fix stuff. So that was my first step. I worked part time as a part time genius because I was basically just supplementing the theatre stuff. My life aim at the time was just to earn just enough to cover my rent and something to eat and nothing else more. And I did that for many years while crafting the theatre stuff. And then that's when I sort of shook that off and went to Australia and kind of left all that behind to really focus on writing books. And one of the reasons why I went to writing books is because of the time as well. With books, it's about plugging away every day. It's like, I always say, it's like writing a book's like moving a lake with a teaspoon. You've got to show up every day and you've got to do a little bit. So I thought, if I can get a full-time job, write books, at 6 a.m, and that's going to give me time to do both. So that led me into the full-time. And then when I was in full-time kind of working in sort of, it was like a technical account management role. That's when I started to get these people that just needed these security requirements. So I thought, hang on, I really want to capitalize on that because I really enjoy it. And that's when I dived into it. So there's a jump into technology in general, and then there's a sidestep. And I think that sidestep is important because I think people kind of come out of boot camps and stuff and they want to apply for lots of security roles, but those security roles are hard. I think that entry level roles are hard to get. So my journey is through that sidestep, which I think is important.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I love the concept of a sidestep too, because again, the mindset is you weren't necessarily looking initially to get into cybersecurity. You were working in something that was kind of tandem, sort of technology, right? Tandem to the field. And as you learned more and approached more, you said, "This is something I want to pivot into. I want to tack into." And that's really fascinating. So, you being from a creative background, what if someone who is creative were to listen to this and they say, "Oh, this guy Charlie seems to know what he's talking about. I have a similar journey to him, at least creatively." But then they're thinking about the rest of your story, saying, I started working at a Genius at an Apple store, and then moved over into cybersecurity." They're thinking, I could never do that. What's your encouragement to them?
I think my encouragement is that the industry does need diverse perspectives. And I'm not sure if this answers your question, but
However you want. You're the creative.
yeah. So I have this kind of unwritten policy where we prioritize as a company, LeftBrain, we prioritize career switchers at the moment for our recruitment because of that very thing, the creative aspect. On our in our company at the moment, we've hired several career switchers. One of them has been a teacher, and we've got another one who was a TV in the TV industry, and we've got heaps more who have lots of creative side things. Like we've got a fantastic artist in our help desk, and we've lots of diverse people. But basically, I love career switches because of that very thing you said, when you get these kind of creative minds in a room, we approach things from a slightly different angle. And in a way, you have the excuse to kind of jettison, some industry norms that people just presume are there for a good reason. But actually, the beauty of cyber and what I love about security, particularly governance and risk management side of it, is that you can make up what works best for you. So you've got to start with the organization and you've got to make security fit to the organization in a way that achieves your goals and helps the organization succeed in its objective. That there's a creative process. That's like security. The nuts and bolts of security are the same, like, vulnerabilities, all that jazz. But the way you kind of like put governance, risk management, and structure into a company to succeed, and particularly companies like tech companies who've got, a very fast-paced, agile. When you have that creative freedom to put things in how you think works best for the company, then you get really great results. So with our security team are the ones that we've got a lot of switches in that team, and so we've kind of taken risk management and we've applied it on a mass scale across our client base, and we've had a lot of freedom to do that by kind of like looking at the rules and saying what fits and what can we kind of adjust. So I think the message then is that this is a creative pursuit. I think there's a lot of creativity in security, and that we need you, and the industry needs that.
That's fantastic. Do you have any examples of someone you've brought on before who is a career switcher, brought that fresh perspective outside the industry, and they helped shift your team in the way that your team approached a problem or the way they did something?
Yeah, we've just finished a round at the moment of risk, delivering risk assessments to the masses, as it were, and we've got a chap. I don't want to I'm going to mention, I won't mention his name, but my other security person, if you're listening, you're also as valued. But what I love is that we're approaching creative businesses, and we had a risk assessment down, and he just came in and he goes, this doesn't make sense, right? Why don't we structure it this way? Why don't we say, here's what you have, here's what could go wrong, here's how we can fix it, instead of like risk mitigations, risk environment, all that stuff. He's just like, why don't we just present it like a simple, journey from the things you have to protecting them, and that influenced the way we approached and presented risk and made it relevant to the business that aren't really interested in risks. These businesses, they're not particularly interested in. They just need to know, how do we kind of fulfill our goals? How do we become resilient in an appropriate manner? But we need to speak their language. And so that was kind of a nice mindset shift.
Isn't that the beauty of bringing in people from diverse careers too? Because they're not going to, if you fit the mold of cybersecurity, like the traditional mold, you're very techy, you're very smart, right? Very very smart around technology and how the inner workings. Some of deep coding. Like there's so many avenues that you approach, and how these security controls work very intricately and very dynamically, and how they all work together to protect a system. But many times people who live in that headspace have trouble communicating to those that don't. So when you bring in these career switchers, they learn all that stuff, right? Those are the teachable skills. But then the unteachable skills are, hey, I've lived the life of a lot of these people that you're bringing the cyber to. And when you do that, now you're saying, hey, I'm going to take that head knowledge, those teachable skills that I've learned, and I can communicate those in a way that the person we're approaching understands. And I love that. That's such a beautiful way to bring cybersecurity to the business owner, the standard business owner, because everyone needs to understand it. Everyone needs to have it in today's world. And if you can't communicate it properly, like you said, they don't necessarily think about risk on a regular basis. So there's that mindset of, okay, how do we convey this? How do we communicate this?
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant point. And that's where I think, people call that the unicorn, right? They say, people are asking for unicorns who are deeply technical, but also really good at communicating and have really good soft skills. Um, and my response is, I think, unicorns do exist, and soon they'll be everywhere, because those soft skills and that, EQ, the emotional intelligence, is, we won't get into nature nurture, but it's an essential part of someone's character.
Sure.
Technical skills are teachable. So if more people are switching from diverse industries that inherently have attracted more EQ, and they come in and they up their IQ in the security game, then we've suddenly got a whole field of unicorns. And the net result we want for security, why I'm in this field, we're all in this field, is we want the industry to be better. We want the world, the nation, the world to be more secure. And you can't do that if you can't communicate it. And it's all about the outcome. Like, if you're deeply technical and you can't communicate it, that's a poor outcome. If you're really good at communicating and you understand the technical side, then that's going to get you a better outcome. And that's what we need.
Yeah, man. So I have one other question that's kind of been nagging at me since we started this conversation. Well, not since we started, since you really got into all the artistic and the creative mindset behind the way you operate, behind the way your team operates. Why is your company called LeftBrain? Isn't LeftBrain typically associated with like the analytical? Like, I'm LeftBrain, I'm very mathematical, logic, philosophy, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll have to ask our founder. I'm not sure. I think where it comes from is, 2009 is when we started. And like I said, we were looking after creatives mostly. And we still do, and we still love looking after creatives. But the creatives obviously are right brain. So we were the left brain to their right brain.
There you go.
But now when I talk about left brain, I say, actually, we're the right brain approach to left brain. So we, in a way, our mission has evolved into bringing creativity and diversity into left brain functions in order to have a net result of better brain, as it were, or whole brain.
Man, I love that.
I've spoken that out loud though, so
honestly, it makes a lot of sense, right? Your company is LeftBrain, and you're typically MSPs are doing the kind of work that is aligned with kind of left brain thinking. It doesn't mean that the MSP themselves is left brain. It's just that they align with that. But then in your career journey, and it may not have always been this way, but in the career journey of left brain, you've hired on a lot of artistic type and creative types. So it's almost like you're showing how a right brained individual can bring their right brain thinking into something that is traditionally left brain. So looking back on this whole journey, right, you did children's theater, which I think is amazing, because I used to be I was a camp counselor for like 7 years, and keeping children's attention for longer than like 5 minutes is a gift in and of itself. So amazing. Kudos there. But going from there to cybersecurity. So children's theater, normal theater production, writing, directing, writing novels, literature, now into working at Apple Genius Bar, now in cybersecurity. What is something you've learned along the way that you might have never discovered if you kind of just stayed on the theater path?
Yeah. I think what I've learned and the reason why I enjoy my job is that my desires, right, from a young age, was to kind of write, create, lead, and what that was, right, when you pull away what you're actually doing, when I pull away, the mechanics of staging a show with actors and producing it. What is that? That is, the buzz of leading people on a united vision. It's the buzz of achieving something with a group of people. It's the buzz of trying to be the best you can be, in an industry. At the time, I wanted to sort of revolutionize theatre with some sort of new approach. And when you strip away the mechanics of it, you have that buzz. That's the buzz that kind of gets you out of bed. And I have that same buzz now because I'm doing the same thing. I'm creating, shaping a vision, leading a group of diverse people, trying to achieve something big, trying to kind of think radically about an industry and a way of approaching it differently. And it's exactly the same. There's no difference. So one earns me a steady income, one didn't, and that's the main difference. Although I do want to say that I don't want to put down creative work, like everyone else who is doing creative work. Massive hats off, especially if you're making a living out of it. I wasn't able to make a good enough living, but that doesn't mean that that's not valid. It's hugely valid. So I just want to say that to not upset anyone. But I get the same buzz as I used to do putting on shows. And so what I've learned is that sometimes you need to challenge why you think you're doing something, and you need to just dig down into the heart of what it is that makes you tick. And then that's where you lean into that place. And when you combine those elements of kind of what makes you tick and what you're good at and what opportunities you have, then you've got an area where you can kind of excel. So that's, I think the biggest lesson is that. And the surprise that led me to that was that I haven't really missed writing. The last thing I wrote was a middle grade children's book, which is different to my other ones. And my ambition is by the time my little girls are old enough to read it, so I've still got another 6 years, I'm going to finish it. So I'm still going to itch that.
I love that. Awesome.
But apart from that, I'm enjoying myself. So.
Thanks for listening to Scaling the Wall. This episode was brought to you by Yukon. At Yukon, we believe everybody has the right to survive a cyber attack. Learn more at yukon.com. That's UKON.com. Be sure to check out the show notes if you want to learn more about and connect with our guests from this episode. And if you enjoyed the show and like what you heard, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, subscribe on YouTube, and hit the bell so you never miss a future episode. See you next time.